Okay, everybody, we're back from the break. Welcome back. We're going to start a new unit, and the unit is JavaScript. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to start by just showing you some of the things that JavaScript can do. It is a client-side scripting language, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. It's code that executes in the browser instead of on the server. So PHP executed on the server, JavaScript executes on the browser, and you can use it to add dynamic elements to your web page. So any web page that has functionality built into it that moves around and changes while you're interacting with it has JavaScript on it. Almost certainly has JavaScript on it. Unlike PHP, which is one of many languages you can use for the server side, there's really only one language, just for historical reasons, idiosyncrasies of the way that things developed. There's really only one language for the client, and that's JavaScript. And JavaScript is probably the biggest language in the world right now. It's used for all kinds of things. It's starting to be used on the server side as well. It's used to create apps in all kinds of contexts now. But it got its start as the language built into the web browser. So if you take a look at the screen here, what I'm showing you here is this is Toys R Us. And I wanted to show you the image magnifier. This is a Hatchimals princess or something. My kid's into these. So as I mouse over this thing and move around, it shows me a different view. So what's happening when I do this? Image magnifiers all work in different ways, and Toys R Us recently changed the way that theirs works. It doesn't work the same as it used to. But basically, as I move around here, events are firing. So I'm creating mouse move events. I'm creating mouse enter and mouse leave events. So whenever I enter one of these menus, there's an enter event, and you can see that the page is responding. And when I enter into here, it responds by changing the image in the box to a larger version of the image. And then as I move, it moves the image around. This is all JavaScript in action. And the way that it works is basically you write these little JavaScript functions and you attach them to the events. It's event-driven programming, just like .NET, which I think you guys are taking right now when you're creating Windows forms, and also just like in Java when you made a graphical user interface in Java. It's event-driven programming. So JavaScript is responding to events on the page. And if you want to know exactly what it's doing to make things move around, what it's doing is it's interacting with the browser's model of the page by changing the CSS rules and changing the HTML elements that are on the page. So if you open up with Control-Shift-I or F12, do that again. If you open up the developer tools over here, you have the console view. You may often see the element view over here. We've been using the network view as well, but we're not using that right now. We're just going to use the element view. So this is showing you, as you mouse over this, it's showing me all of the elements on the page. And this is the browser's representation of the page. And as I mouse over it, I'm having trouble finding things here. But as I mouse over it, it's showing me different parts of the page. It's showing me which part I'm mousing over. Okay, now if I want to see what's happening here, I can right-click this image and say Inspect. And it takes me to, you see this is an image element over here. And you see what's going on in the purple there? There's a style element which is setting, it sets position to absolute for this element, and then it uses top and left to move an element around. So this is the zoomed image being moved around. So it's literally changing the HTML, and you can also see it down here. Where are we? Here we are in element style. The JavaScript program is reaching in and changing those CSS properties, and that's how it's doing what it's doing. Same thing for when I go mouse over one of these big drop-down menus here. Here's a nice one. If I right-click this and say Inspect, you can see that menu. We might need to, hang on, I might have clicked the wrong thing. Let's try over here. Let's try this one. Inspect the category menu. You can see it up there changing. You can see the height property there. I don't know if you can see it. It's the last one. Changes. Now it's got a height of 80 pixels. Now it's got a height of 292 pixels. And there are some other changes going on as well. It's changing class names and other properties of the HTML. So that's how JavaScript does what it does. So anytime you see something like this, it's JavaScript. Now, an image magnifier is an awesome little thing to try and create on your own, but it's pretty advanced. Even though it's a simple, common piece of functionality, it's a tricky thing to write. But I just wanted to let you know what kinds of things we can do. There's a couple of other examples I can show you. This Scriptaculous page, when you see things flying in and growing and stuff like that, some of that kind of thing can be done in CSS, but a lot of times that's being done using JavaScript timer functions. And if you want to see a more extreme example of what JavaScript can do, this right here, if I inspect this, it is a canvas element, which we're not going to cover in this course, but I can point you to some resources if you're interested. Once you put a canvas element down, you can use JavaScript to draw on it. Basically, it's a painting canvas, and you can create little games. Okay, that was very noisy. I don't know if you heard that or not. But anytime you play a little game like this in a window on a browser, it used to be that was a Flash plugin, but more and more these days, as Flash is less and less supported, more and more this is just pure JavaScript. Anyways, that's an example of a few of the things that JavaScript can do for you. If we go back to the graphic that I showed you at the beginning, this is how far we've come. In the last unit we added the database, so we've got pages being displayed on the client. The user interacts and triggers an HTTP request, which runs a script, which maybe dips into a database and sends back a response that's customized for that user, for whatever that user's doing or whoever that user is. It's customized by getting information out of a database and then writing part of that page based on that information. Now we're adding a level of user interaction over here. So along with the HTTP response, that HTTP response can include HTML, it can include CSS. Now we're going to add that it can include JavaScript code, and that JavaScript code is sent uncompiled. So the raw JavaScript code is sent over to the browser. The browser then interprets it. So JavaScript, like PHP, is an interpreted language, but it happens on the browser. So the code is actually available to any user who downloads it, and they can see it. And the JavaScript can be used to help render the page, and then it can respond to user interaction. And the page will be automatically redisplayed if JavaScript changes something about the page. So that's kind of where we're going in this unit. Now we're going to work up to it slowly. So we're going to start with just some simple, just hello world, and go from there. Now once again, you know a lot of. We're going to skip over a lot of the details of the language because you know how to use for loops and stuff like that, and it's all the same C-style syntax as PHP and Java. So we're going to skip over a lot of that stuff, and we're going to focus in on the details of how JavaScript does what it does and what's different about JavaScript, because there are some very important differences, and how it interacts with a web page. So we're going to start with Hello World. The easiest way to see Hello World, you can open the developer tools using Control-Shift-I or F12 on any page, go into the console, and here you can execute JavaScript commands. It's kind of like, if you remember the Python shell, so I just created a variable called x, and now I can say, x equals x plus 10. So you can use it like a little calculator over here, and I can also do console log hello world. So console.log is debugging output for JavaScript, like that. All that's going to cause it to do, it's like a print statement or an echo statement, but it happens right in the console here, where the user would almost never see it. So the console is where we hide debugging output from our programs and notes for developers and things like that. But whenever you're developing a JavaScript program, you should always have the console open, and you should be watching what's going on and looking at your output. So console.log accesses the console object, calls the log method. Notice we're back to using dot instead of the arrow like in PHP, and passes it hello world as a string, and that gets printed out there. The undefined is the return value of the log method. So if a method does not return anything, then by default it just gets the value undefined. So that's what that means there. Okay, so that's a little piece of JavaScript code. That's basically your hello world program. It's one line, but we want to put it on a page. We want to see it run on a page. So to make that work, we'll go into the code for this. So you can find in the module for module 3 for JavaScript, you can find the module 3 code, and you'll see there's tons of stuff in here, which we'll get to eventually. But I'm just going to grab the template for now. I'm going to copy it. Now you don't actually have to have XAMPP for this. I'm going to continue to use xamp anyway, just so that I don't lose practice, so we don't lose practice with it. But we don't actually need it. So I can create a new folder here called, basic JavaScript, like this. Actually, I should call it. I'm going to call it basic JS, like that. Basic JS. And then in I go, I'm going to paste the template in there. I'll just call it examples. No, I'll call it hello world. Like that. And then I will edit it. Not with Notepad++. Edit it with VS Code. Open with VS Code. Okay, so here's the template. It just says put some content here. And I'm going to add a script tag in the header. Now you can add script tags wherever you want. And just like a style tag, inside the script tag goes a different language. So for a style tag, the CSS goes inside of it. Inside the script tag is where you put JavaScript. So here I go, console.log, hello world, like that. Now, when I run this file, I'm going to start up xamp. All I need is the web server for this. And then I'm going to go to localhost /basic.js. There it is. Notice I have the console open here. When I click it, it shows the contents here, and it says hello world to me over here in the console. If I go back over here to my Visual Studio Code, I can add more stuff. I can say console.log, how are you? And JavaScript, like PHP, is interpreted, but it happens on the server. So this whole thing, along with the code, gets sent to the, it happens on the client. So this whole thing, along with the code, gets sent to the client, and the client just starts interpreting it. And what that means is it builds something called a document object model, which we'll talk about more in lesson 3. It's building objects for all these tags, and when it gets to a script tag, it just executes the code from top to bottom in that tag before it moves on and does the rest of it. If I reload over here now, whoops, I need to save my content over here. If I reload over here now, I get 2 lines. And notice it's telling me, since this is intended as debugging output, it doesn't look awesome. And also it's giving me, helpfully, it's telling me where this output is coming from. So it's coming from lines 9 and 10 of my code. See lines 9 and 10 over here. So that's pretty handy. So that's the Hello World program in a script element on the page. You can also, and this is a good thing to do, you can also put a script element that has a source attribute. So I can say, I want you to load some code from hello.js. You still have to close the script element over here. You can't put any code inside. If you put any code inside, it's going to ignore it. It's going to go and get the code instead from the source. Notice I now have 2 script elements here. So if I do this, right now it's not going to do anything. In fact, it's going to give me an error in the console over here. This is, by the way, where JavaScript errors will be reported. So that's another reason to get it open. Also HTML and retrieval errors and so on. So it's telling me it can't get that file. So what I have to do over here is create a new file. I'm going to save it as, I want it to be a JavaScript file. Just JavaScript. I'm saving it, that's good, in basic.js, and I want it to be called hello.js. So now I have a JavaScript file called hello.js, and I can enter JavaScript commands in here. Hello from a file, exclamation mark. There we go. So there's my hello world program just in one single file, and that's going to be loaded. So when I run this, I should see this script element run, and then this script element run, which goes to the file, if I've done everything correctly. So reload that again. There we go. So you can see I got 2 outputs from hello world.html from lines 9 and 10, and then I got an output from hello.js from line 1. Okay, so that's how you integrate JavaScript into a web page. I want to show you one other thing, which is if we do a view page source over here, you can see the code is right there. It's not like PHP where the code is hidden, because on PHP the code is executed on the server and only the output gets sent to the client. But with JavaScript, the whole code is sent to the client and then it's executed on the client. So Chrome and Firefox and all those browsers contain JavaScript interpreters that then run the code. So anytime you do any JavaScript development, basically you're open sourcing your code. And if you look so if I click there, by the way, I'm looking at the hello.js file. I loaded that, and I can see what that has in it. So yeah, so you're open sourcing your code. A lot of JavaScript code you see out there isn't very readable. So you can go to any page you want. Let's go here, right-click out here, view page source. I haven't done this before, so I don't know how well it's going to work. But we'll probably find some JavaScript here somewhere. If I go to I want a script element. Here we go, here's a script element. So there's some JavaScript code right there. Here's one where they're loading some JavaScript code right here. So it's got some other attributes in it. I don't know if you can see that. Let me make it a bit bigger. But if I click here, I can see the JavaScript code, and you can see it's been kind of obfuscated because a lot of big companies out there are using frameworks that do a lot of auto generation of JavaScript code. So this is JavaScript code as well, but it's been kind of obfuscated, made to be difficult to read. All right, so that is Hello World. What I want to do now is just take you on a very quick tour of the JavaScript language. I'll keep using hello. I just want to show off a few things, and let's go into the Module 3 guide. So I've gone through Hello World and how to put it in different places. Here's the JavaScript basics, and there's a JavaScript tutorial on W3 Schools, which has tons and tons of information. Oh, excuse me. I don't want to go over absolutely everything here, but I just want to show you that you can do the basic stuff. So it's got a C-like syntax. It's imperative, meaning it executes without, you don't need a method or a function or an object in order to run JavaScript code. It just runs from top to bottom. It is also object-oriented, so it's fully object-oriented, and you can do object-oriented stuff in it. There's some optional parts of the guide that talk about object-oriented programming in JavaScript, but it's not an official part of the course at the moment. And it has a C-like syntax, and just like PHP, it's dynamically typed, and it's weakly typed. So dynamically typed means you don't declare the type of a variable, and variables can switch types. And it's weakly typed, meaning just like PHP, it will never give you an error for a type. It always converts types and then continues. So because of that, it has the triple equals and the double not equals here, just like PHP does. So let's take a look at how to declare variables. Let's do it over here in hello.js. So let's go let. So the proper way to declare variables is with the let keyword. Out there in the wild, you'll sometimes see people use the var keyword. That's an older way of doing things. It's no longer considered best practice. So we're going to go ahead and use let. But if you see var, just convert it to let when you incorporate those ideas into your code. So let name equals Sam, for example, and then I can say console.log hello plus Sam. Okay, and let's run it over here. Run this again by reloading it. Oh, Sam is not defined. Oh, I made a mistake. My variable was called name. Like that. So if I go back over here, it says Sam is not defined on line 5. It's uncaught reference error. Really important to have the console open, because what you'll notice is once we start, right now we're not using this window really at all. We're just looking at what's going on in the console. But eventually when we start using JavaScript to make changes here, if you don't have this window open, JavaScript will just, if it doesn't work, it'll just fail silently. You won't see any errors out here, so you have to have this window open to see the errors. I'm going to reload to run the file again, and there we go. Now it's saying hello Sam. And because I defined a variable called name, I can actually look at it here. So this code, this script is executing. You can think of it as executing at the very end of the HTML file. Any variables I create, any global names I create are going to be accessible here. So I can do that. You can, so that's the basics. You can also do stuff like this. Let's do a for loop. For let I equals 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. So there we go. And Alt-Shift-F should work just fine if you've got the right extensions installed. So now here's just a for loop. It looks almost like Java, except for the use of let here. So really the only differences in syntax have to do with variables. The only main differences in base syntax between Java, PHP, and JavaScript have to do with how variables are treated. So I printed out Hello Sam 10 times. Because this is debugging output, it doesn't actually print them all. It just prints the number 10 here, meaning this line was output 10 times, and then it sort of gathers them all up for me to save space and tells me what line it came from. If I want to see them all, I could print something else. So I could say console.log. This is hello number, and then add I onto the end of there. Alt-Shift-F. Notice if I didn't mention this already, it's plus. We're back to plus for concatenation, and you can't embed variable names inside strings like you can in PHP. So if I reload this now, because the 10 identical lines didn't come together, it shows them all. So line 6, then line 7, then line 6, then line 7, and so on. Okay, so while loops, do while loops, switch statements, if statements, else, it's all the same. Okay, so I don't want to go over it. You can brush up on it if you want to by going into here. Declaring variables is with the let keyword. If you don't declare your variables, they're global by default. So we're going to be in the habit of always using let. Otherwise, we'll always have global scope, and we don't want that. I'll talk about that again in a moment. And there are some basic types, including Boolean. There's a number type, strings and objects, and there's also null and undefined. We already saw undefined. Finally, arrays and strings are objects with methods, unlike in PHP where we had to use global functions to interact with arrays and strings. So it was count and then in brackets the name of the array to find out how long an array was. In JavaScript, there's a .length property. So if I want to create an array, I can do it like this. Let array equal, hi 23 true. So I can mix and match types. That array has 3 elements in it. And then I can say for let I equal 0, I less than array.length, I plus plus, console.log array I. Okay, so there is Alt-Shift-F, save that. There's a really basic example of an array. Oh, true is not defined because I think it has, are we back to a lowercase t? Yes, we are. So I think in PHP it was an uppercase t. Am I right? No, I'm thinking of Python. I'm also teaching a course that uses Python. So some languages require an uppercase t, some languages it's a lowercase t. So the Boolean type has lowercase t. So there we go. We're printing those three things out. I've got this array variable now called array. And I can actually just go ahead and assign, a new item to it if I want, like that. I assigned that to index 4. So this is index 0, 1, 2. If I had assigned to index 3, it would have gone here, but I assigned to index 4. So you can actually have, don't ever do this, but you can have arrays with holes in them. And if you open this up, it shows you we only have these indexes. We don't have index 3 in here. But it considers the length to be 5 because it fills in an empty element in here. So you can get into some pretty craziness with arrays in JavaScript, but just keep that in mind. You'll almost never get an array index out of bounds exception let me just fill in a number here. There, I filled it in, so the empty slot has been filled in now. Okay, where are we? Oh yeah, there's also a math object inside of JavaScript. So you can see it here. There's a math object, there's a random object you might be interested in looking at. There are string objects and so on. I'll leave you guys to explore a lot of that. And there's a language basics example on Canvas that I'll show you in a second that has all of this stuff in it. But if you want to create a random number, math.random works just like it does in Java. It gets you a random double between 0 and 1. If you want to say roll a die, you have to multiply by 6 and add 1, and then use math.floor. So here's a little formula for generating a random integer from 1 to n. You put n there, it multiplies this by 6, you end up with a number between 0 and 5.99999. Math.floor cuts off the decimal, so it's between 0 and 5, and then plus 1 adds 1 to it, so you're going to get between 1 and 6. That's how you generate. That's one way to generate random numbers. There is a whole random object as well that does it too. So if you're doing games and stuff, randomness is important for games, so you need that. What else? We should talk a little bit about functions, because we're going to need we didn't talk about functions in PHP, but we are going to need functions in JavaScript. So here, let me create a function for you. It's a lot like Python functions. If you remember, you use the def keyword for those, but for this we use just the function keyword. We'll create a function called foo with 3 parameters like this, and Alt-Shift-F to make them look nicer. So this, we can pass 3 parameters to this, and what we can do is maybe we can console.log ABC, and we can print, we can return A times B times C. How about that? So now we have a little function, and then we can, now that it's defined, we can call it with the values 2, 3, and 4. So that should output 2, 3, 4, and then it should do 2 times 3 times 4, which I think is 24. It'll return that, but it won't do anything with that number because we're just calling it here. Okay, so let's have a look over here. So yeah, it outputs 2, 3, 4. Now that I have foo defined, I can just type foo, and you see that it's a function. I can say 2, 3, 4 like that, and it will print out 2, 3, 4, and also show me the return value. 8, 5, 2 gives me 80. The funny thing about functions is that they're very flexible. So I can still call foo even without any parameters. You can't do that in PHP or in Java or in Python or most of the other languages that you know. I have 3 parameters here, A, B, C. If I don't pass any, they just all get the special value undefined. So you see it's printing out undefined, undefined, undefined. And then I tried to multiply those 3 things together, which doesn't work. But notice it doesn't give me an error. It just gives me back the special value NaN, which stands for not a number. So I can call this with any number of parameters. If I call it with just 2 parameters, I get 3, 4, and undefined. And so it's still not a number because I'm trying to multiply by something that's undefined. If I pass it with all 3, then everything works. I can even pass it with an extra parameter, which it will just simply ignore. There's only 3 variables in the function, A, B, and C. So 293 gets ignored and thrown away. And it goes even further than that. You can do stuff like this. You can create default values for functions. So there's no function overloading in JavaScript. You can't create one function, more than one function with the same name. If you do that, it'll just overwrite. So the second function you create will become the function with that name. But you can add default values here, like that. So here I'm saying, if they don't pass in a B parameter, instead of undefined, make it 1. And if they don't pass in a C, instead of undefined, make it 1. But they still have to pass an A, otherwise they'll get undefined. So now I can do foo 10. Oops, I need to reload this. There we go, let's try that again. Up arrow gets me back what I just did. And you can see that even though I only passed 1 parameter, A got that 1 parameter. Here's what the function looks like again. B gets a 1 by default, and C gets a 1 by default. So I can pass it with one parameter, with 2 parameters like this, or with all 3 like that, and it'll override the defaults. So that's kind of cool. It's a facility that exists in Python as well, although you may not have seen it. You may or may not have seen it. So this is an example using this spam function, and this is not allowed. However, you can't. Once you start introducing default values, you have to if B has a default value, the next one on the list has to have a default value as well. Okay, so there's some basics. I'm pointing you to 2 places: language basics and functions. We're going to say a lot more about those examples, about the function examples. But let me just show you. If I go over to, let me go back to my code here. We want language basics and functions. I'm going to copy those and bring them over into basic.js. Inside language basics, you'll see there's an index.html file, a JavaScript folder, and a CSS folder. Here I'm following the best practice of a lot of web designers, which is that they have short named lowercase folders for each file type. So the JavaScript files go in here, the CSS files go in there. If I run this, let me go back to here. If I go into language basics, it's going to, because it's called index.html, it's going to load it right away. It says open the JavaScript console, so there's a little bit of style here. We do a view page source. You can see this is a very simple page. It's getting its style out of css/helloworld.css, and it's getting the JavaScript out of js/basics. So if you click here, here's the file that's being executed, and it's just showing, you know, some variable declarations. It's showing an array here, and then it does a console log on those variables. It shows you a for loop, and then it does this rock paper scissors thing, where it generates a random number between 0 and 2, and then uses an if-else chain to output which one it chose. And so if we go back over to, here we are, if I reload this page, you should see this change. So paper, paper, rock, paper, and so on. And you can play with the variables in here, A, B, C. There's also a functions file too, which also has an index.html, so it's going to load right away. And it says to try out these commands. If we do a view page source here, you can see I'm declaring some functions. So the spam example function is here. The say hi function just says returns hello plus whatever you put as a parameter. So if I go say hi like this, just says hello undefined because I didn't pass a parameter. If I put my name in there, it'll say hello Sam. And I've got spam as well, which I can call with different values. Okay, there's a lot more going on in this functions thing as well, which we'll look at in the next section. But that's it for now. So we're going to say a lot more about functions in the next video. What I would like, this video is maybe a little longer than usual, but we only have 3 videos this week. So what I would like you to try is to do exercise 1 here. So write a JavaScript program in a .js file and load it into a web page using a script element. Define a function with one parameter n, and then inside that function there's an if statement. If the parameter is even, you'll have to kind of remember how to do that. It should say hello world n times in the console, otherwise it should say goodbye world. And then test it by having it execute 5 times in a loop. So if you want to see what that looks like, I've got some solutions here. I think it's this one. Oh no, exercises part 1 is the file. So I'm going to move that back over to, whoops, my htdocs. Basic JS, put it right here. Exercises part 1. So if I go over to here, go here. Oh yeah, okay. Sorry, I missed some stuff. Oh yeah, I need the JS file and the CSS file to come with it because it's loading its JavaScript from the JS folder. So the actual exercise part 1 JavaScript is right here. So let me go back up here, reload that. That's what it should look like. So there is a function called hello. There's a few functions in here, a few exercises in here, and I'm not asking you to do most of them. But the one I asked you to do is the hello function. Don't look at the code. So it's called hello. So I can just call it like this, hello 4, and it says hello world 4 times because that's an even number. Here it said hello world 10 times. You can see there's other things going on in this file. But if I give it an odd integer, it says goodbye world. Okay, so that's what you guys have to do. I showed you the code by accident, but you already have access to it. But try and write it yourself, just as a get your feet wet exercise to make this thing work. And you can see there's a lot more going on here. There are some exercises that we'll talk about from the part 2 of this section in the next video. Okay, so have fun. Try out that exercise, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk a little bit more about functions, and we'll try and do maybe we'll try and do exercise 2 and exercise 3, which is the one that's counting here in the console for us.